Good morning.
Good morning. Morning.
So last week, Sue Walter asked why we didn't talk about karma. So I thought this week I would talk about karma. So the first part of this talk is a little geeky, so you have to bear with me. So we'll talk about what karma is, what it means, and then a Zen take on what it means to talk about karma. Okay, so the dictionary definition of the Sanskrit word for karma is karman, and karman is called the inflected form of karma. So karma is the inflected form of karma, karman. And that means that this inflected form means that the form of the word has been changed. I looked it up, it's a little hard to tell what exactly an inflected form is, but I think in this case, what it means is that karman goes from being just meaning action to meaning something like action, which is the implication of movement, something coming to fruition, ripening. So that means that from a Buddhist perspective, and actually from a previous schools of religion in India, it means that karma is a result of a kind of energy or actions that we engage in that come to fruition. And so Buddhism is a response in part to some of these other schools, which I'm not going to talk about here, but might come up in our class that we're having. But Buddhism says that virtuous deeds result in future happiness, and harmful deeds result in future suffering. So Shakyamuni Buddha said that karma is the result of intention, which is important. So there are 4 resulting actions from karma: wholesome actions leading to wholesome results, unwholesome actions lead to unwholesome results, mixed actions result in partial harm and partial benefit, and indeterminate actions which happen after enlightenment and result in no results in the conditioned realm. So that means that according to early Buddhism or Theravadan Buddhism, when you reach a certain stage, your actions do not have karmic repercussions, and then that way you will not be reborn into the 6 realms. So also, according to Buddhism, the immediate karma of someone's not necessarily going to appear in this lifetime. So you may say, oh, that's a horrible person. They've got all these, they're rich, they're happy, all these wonderful things. Why aren't they being struck down by karmic lightning? And that's because karma does not necessarily ripen in this lifetime. Or there might be somebody who's really poor and they're absolutely the most wonderful person in the world who's suffering and sick and all these bad things befall them, but they will reap their benefits, if you will, in a future lifetime. So that's also part of this. In Theravadan Buddhism, the goal of Theravadan Buddhism, as I've said before, is to get off the wheel of birth and death. So one does this by becoming completely free from all attachments and karmic obstacles that cause rebirth. So our karmic residue, if you will, is what pulls us into the next rebirth. In Mahayana Buddhism, the bodhisattva is pulled into the next rebirth by their desire to save all beings. So in that way, Theravadan Buddhism, the goal of Theravadan Buddhism is a very kind of personal salvation, if you will. That doesn't mean that they're not compassionate or kind to other people, etc., but the goal of practice is a very personal goal. So Mahayana Buddhism, which Zen is one sect of Mahayana Buddhism. Again, our goal is not to create good karma to get off the wheel of birth and death, which may be one of the reasons why we don't talk about karma per se as a kind of, sometimes it can be used as a kind of cudgel to get people to do the right thing. The Tibetans have a saying, they'll say if something bad happens, they'll say, well, it's like, this is a way that I've worked through some of my karma. So that's a way to think about that. Tibetan Buddhism, as near as I can tell, is pretty engaged with the issue of one's rebirth and practice, which is not so much talked about or much of a concern in Soto Zen or in Zen Buddhism. It's not that we don't necessarily believe in rebirth, but we're more engaged with what's happening right now than what might be happening or doing something for something that might be in the future. So that this karma, this issue of karma, can be used as a kind of encouragement for practice. But if we do this in a way to try to scare people into doing good deeds, doing beneficial action, then I would say that's a very a very basic kind of way of talking about this, and not a very sophisticated way to talk about it. But it can also be a way to work with your difficulties. So if you're having a lot of defensiveness or resistance to engaging in some beneficial action, like let's say you're an anger type and you don't want to apologize, for example, because you feel like that's something that's going to makes you feel like you're having to give up something or do something that you feel like you shouldn't have to do. But it's, according to practice, the beneficial thing to do. Well, you might do it to get what you want. So in that way, it's a very kind of basic way to talk about this. But you might find that as you do this for very selfish reasons, you start to see the benefit of this from a much broader perspective, that it is actually creating beneficial action for other people. And as that ripens and develops in yourself, you start to want to do it for more altruistic reasons. This might also be true for greed. It could also be true for waking up to what's actually happening. I just think anger is a good example. So that's kind of a basic way of thinking about karma. Okay, so what I want to do is talk about a koan that in Zen that is used to discuss karma. So this koan is called the Fox koan, and here's how the koan goes. When Zen Master Baozhang gave a talk, there would always be an old man standing in the back of the room. Now, if you see illustrations of this, you always see like a guy in a kimono standing in the back of, because of course Baozhang was alive like in the 6th century or something, 7th century. You'll see a guy standing in the back of the assembly, and he'll be in a kimono, and sticking out of the bottom of the kimono will be a little foxtail. So one day the man stayed after the talk, and he said to Baozhang, "I am not a human being. I was abbot of this monastery in the time of Kashyapa Buddha. A student asked me, does an enlightened person fall into cause and effect? In other words, is an enlightened person subject to karmic repercussions?" And the fox teacher said, "No, such a person does not." And then he said, "Because I said this, I became a wild fox for 500 lifetimes. Reverend Master," says this to Baozhang, "please say a turning word for me. Free me of this wild fox body." So, and so the fox guy asked Baozhang the question the student asked him. He said, "Does an enlightened person fall into cause and effect?" Master Bajang said, "He is not blind nor confused." So the word that's being translated, he is not blind to cause and effect. So the word that's being translated as blind can also be translated as oblivious to, ignorant of, or ignorant about, and not confused by or confused about this. So he says he's not ignorant of or not confused by cause and effect. So when the old kind of teacher fox person heard this, he was immediately liberated from this body of the wild fox. Okay, so there are a lot of interpretations to this koan, but I'll tell you how I'm thinking about it now. So first of all, the student is asking, can you fall into cause and effect? So what does it mean to fall into something? So there's this feeling here about a person, they're just going along and suddenly fall into something unaware of their situation. So that's one way to think about falling into. So it means, and also here maybe it means that a person is unaware of the full repercussions of their actions. So they fall into this cause and effect. So this teacher could be saying, because I'm enlightened, I am completely aware, therefore I would not fall into cause and effect. But it's also possible that when Baizhang says, don't be, so he's the teacher, the fox teacher goes to, Baizhang says, don't be confused, oblivious, or ignorant of causes and conditions. Clearly, Baizhang was saying, well, no, actually, you are confused about this because he's repeating to him, right? On the other hand, maybe the student's asking, once you've attained realization, do you have to worry about your actions causing harm? That's another question the student might be asking. So here we have fall into, meaning it would be something like, are you subject to cause and effect? Now, this is an interesting question because I've heard of contemporary teachers who say, well, you know, there's non-duality between us, therefore, like if I can sexually abuse you because because of non-duality, everything is empty in some way. So my actions don't really create harm. Now, this is really screwy logic. So this is the problem with this kind of thing of saying, well, no, I don't fall into cause and effect, or when you're enlightened, you're not subject to cause and effect. So also it's impossible not to be subject to cause and effect because cause and effect is impermanence. Cause and effect is everything interacting with everything else. Okay, so somehow this teacher was missing something in his understanding. So, you know, so in a way, the student's saying, well, can you just do anything? And then the teacher said, well, yeah, my actions are not subject to cause and effect. So immediately when this happens, he falls into the realm of the wild fox. Now, foxes in Japanese mythology are tricksters. They are shape changers, and they like to lead people astray. So now the teacher has become a trickster, right? So that's not actually surprising considering this context. So, and the teacher and now is the trickster somewhere in this process is awakened to the fact that he is a trickster, but he's not able to free himself from the effects, the causes and effects of what he said to the student. So because of that, he's reborn over and over again as a wild fox. Now, just as a sub comment here, Dogen says in his commentary on this, he couldn't have been reborn over and over again as a wild fox and conscious of the fact that he was a wild fox over and over again, because if he was, it means that he would have some kind of soul or consciousness that migrated from one body to the next, and that is not a Buddhist teaching. That's absolutely not what Buddhism believes. So Dogen points that out, but nevertheless, for the purposes clearly of this story, he is reborn as a fox over and over again, and he is conscious of the fact that he's a fox, and he's conscious of the fact that that's a problem. So we don't know what the effect on the student was when he said that, but we do know what the effect on this teacher was. The teacher clearly is aware of the fact that he made a mistake by saying that he could not fall into cause and effect. So did he make himself into a wild fox? Was he already a wild fox? Were the conditions already there? Did something outside himself make himself into a wild fox? So are these just things playing out beyond his control? So was there something he set in motion without consciously intending that to be so? I would say, well, probably yes, because most of us really don't want to consciously be tricksters. So I think one way to look at this is when he woke up to what he had done, he was caught in remorse about this. So now the trickster side becomes not being able to extricate himself from beating himself up over and over and over and over again for his actions. So now he's both the fox and the human being simultaneously. Or we could say he's both the fox and the wise side of himself, Buddha nature, also functioning simultaneously, which isn't that true for most of us, right? So it's the Buddha nature, it's this bodhicitta that keeps him coming back to the assembly. Why does he go to Bajang's assembly? Why does he listen to this Dharma teacher? Why does he go to him and say, I've been caught in this wild fox body now for 500 lifetimes. Can you say a turning word, something that will turn me, my mind or my heart or my essence, some way that I'll understand this in a way that I can be liberated from being caught in this? So I would say that, he's able to see his mistake and he's also caught by the mistake. He knows that he was wrong, but he can't shake free of this karmic debt of his actions. So how is it that he got free? So when Master Bajang said, don't ignore cause and effect, what is he saying? Maybe he's saying to the fox teacher, you don't ignore cause and effect in your own life. It's not about the student anymore, what he said to the student. It's about don't get trapped in this cause and effect that's happened to you. Don't get trapped in this way of doing this. So as soon as he says, don't ignore cause and effect, maybe what freed him was he realized, oh, I shouldn't ignore this. I'm responsible for this. I take responsibility for my actions, and yet simultaneously, there's a way in which I can be free from these actions by doing something different, which is what he doesn't seem to be able to do. So each moment, we are always engaged in actions that cause repercussions. It's not possible not to be doing that because we live in a world of cause and effect. So we may not know what the effect of our actions are. So, but our bodies, our minds, the world, our intentions, progress, process, regression, movement, causal relationships, everything is action and reaction, right? Everything is causally functioning. We can't escape it. We could not move our arm. I could move my arm if it weren't for cause and effect. All the chemical things that are going on in my body between my brain and my muscles and everything in order, that's cause and effect as well. So everything, you can't escape that. So we try to wake up to that and realize that. And but I think what happened to this teacher, not Bajang, but the other guy, is that something became static for him. He became caught in this cycle for him. So in that way, he wasn't able to see that change could happen. And I think we do that, we get caught in some cycle of, oh, I'm a bad person, I'm a stupid person, oh, I made this mistake, whatever it is. Have you ever had that feeling like where you did something 10 years ago and you think about it and you go, ugh, like that? It's like, why can't we let that go? We realize it wasn't particularly helpful, maybe it was harmful, but can we let that go and just try to now do the whatever that is and move forward from that? So we don't function in a vacuum. We are interconnected. So we're not disconnected, and that's what it seems like he was saying to the student. Oh, we're disconnected. Things function in this black and white realm, but they don't. And he didn't realize that. And so he got caught in that. So in that way, we cannot ignore cause and effect. And if we ignore cause and effect, then we become the trickster. If we ignore cause and effect, then we become tricked by our own delusion. We think somehow, well, we don't usually think about cause and effect, because if we did, we would probably not ignore it. So, but if we want something to be a certain way, and this is the practice of no self, right? If we're attached to something from our own perspective without being inclusive of anything else, we're tricking ourselves into thinking that there's no cause and effect. We're tricking ourselves into thinking that we are not in an interconnected relationship. We are tricking ourselves in a way in which compassion is no longer functioning. Passion with, right? Empathy. Putting ourselves in the other person's shoes, if you will. So in this case, Baijiangs don't get caught. Not ignoring is realizing everything functions together. And so don't get caught means don't get caught thinking you can't free yourself from these obstructions or from where your blunders and your mistakes. So you think nothing can change. Now, the important part of this is that there's also responsibility. So when we do something that causes harm or is not wholesome or however you want to talk about that, we're responsible for that. If we break trust with somebody, they're not going to trust us just because we decide we're suddenly trustworthy. They're still not going to trust us. So we may have to do something trustworthy with them over and over and over again, maybe for 500 lifetimes, before they realize that we've changed. But that doesn't mean we can't change, right? It's still our responsibility to change, and it's our responsibility to realize that we're responsible for our actions. So changing or transforming does not mean that the repercussions of our actions have no power, if you will. So in that way, we also should not be ignorant of cause and effect. Now, I would say that, again, to reiterate, that there's both wisdom and the trickster side functioning simultaneously in all of us. So again, why did the teacher go and stand in the back of the assembly and listen to Baijiang? Why are we attracted to practice? Practice is hard. If we're really practicing, we're dropping our own agenda when it's appropriate to actually be willing to see ourselves in these interconnected relationships. And as we practice, we start to drop these preconceived ideas about with people, like, let's say, about, well, I like this person, I don't like that person, or whatever it is. Or maybe we, decide that, do you ever watch these programs? Like, Jocko and I like to watch this program called Feed Phil. Has anybody seen that on Netflix? Well, he's this guy who goes around and he goes to different countries and eats various kinds of food. So he eats food that I don't think that I'd be very open to trying. Like, you know what offal is? It's like intestines and things like that. So offal is awful. And that's my preconceived idea. Offal is awful. But he eats offal, and offal is good. So if I went there, I think it would be really important for me to be willing to eat offal to see whether or not offal was good. Or would you be willing to eat a grasshopper? So it's like that kind of thing. I mean, that's on a really, non-emotional, it is emotional, but this sort of non-level of harm or doing harm or not doing harm. Although you might be doing harm if it were somebody who had spent a huge amount of time preparing this meal for you, and you refuse to eat it just based on some preconceived idea you had about whether or not you like this food, even though you didn't know whether or not you liked it, and that you refused to eat it and created harm by hurting this person's feeling who'd spent so much time and work and effort. Anyway, so we have this delusional mind, and we also have the wisdom mind functioning simultaneously. And I think that's what Baizhang triggered for him, is this realization that he didn't have to be caught by his trickster mind, that he could be freed from this trickster mind. So we are both wisdom and trickster simultaneously. So I mentioned this recently because it's an idea that I've been thinking about, which is in Genjo Koan, Dogen says Buddhas are beings who are awakened to delusion. Sentient beings are people who are in delusion about delusion. Now, depending on the translation, but I think in the context of that, Dogen is not saying there are Buddhas here and there are sentient beings here. He's saying when we are awake to delusion and being awake to delusion in a way in which we are not caught by it, then our Buddha mind is coming forward. When we are caught by delusion or we're in the trickster aspect, then we are what he's calling bumpo, which is foolish human beings. So these are not two separate people, two separate entities. These are states of mind or states of being or states of actions that we engage in. So we need to be aware of both, and we need to be really good at recognizing and transforming our delusion. So the better we are at recognizing our delusion, catching ourselves as we are being tricked by our delusion, the more we're going to wake up to our Buddha mind. So he's saying, we do get caught by delusion, but we have to recognize that. And being caught by delusion doesn't mean that if we get so into the idea that we have to get rid of something like delusion, or get rid of the parts of ourselves that we have decided we don't like. If we do that, what we tend to do is repress things, not transform them. Kato Dogen says, he says that you transform through transformation, through going into whatever this problem or delusion is, not by cutting it off. And we also know this therapeutically in Western psychology, that it's like we're going to repress something if we try to cut it off, and we want to actually explore that. But usually we're afraid to explore it because the trickster side of us says, if you explore this, it makes you even worse. Or if you explore this, you're so embarrassed or so averse to this that somehow you just can't enter into that exploration. So from a Buddhist point of view, that's the trickster mind, keeping you from going into and exploring this. And you can do this in a way that is not, it may be scary, but it doesn't have to be harmful, right? So that there are very ways to do that. So that's a different talk or a different psychology or whatever. But the thing is that we go into and are willing to acknowledge that, yes, we are both wisdom and tricksters. Both of those things are simultaneously functioning in us, and that's okay. That's the nature of being a human being. So how can I wake up to my delusion? How can I be aware of that? How can I not be ignorant about that? So Buddhas are very good at being able to do this. So fearlessly being able to do this, that we want to fearlessly enter into and being willing to explore these aspects of ourselves so that we are not caught by them. So karma, what's good karma, what's harmful action, what's causal effect, these are the precepts. If we want to talk about how we work with this idea about beneficial action or causing, we say the three pure precepts, right? Do no harm, try to do good, and benefit all beings. Those are the three pure precepts. So what is that? That's working with karma, right? That's working with cause and effect. The precepts themselves are working with cause and effect, working with this thing we call karma. So we don't talk about it very much, like we don't talk about our karma very much in Zen. But that's what we're doing. We're working with cause and effect. We're working with our actions. We're working with being responsible for waking up to our delusion, seeing our trickster side and our wisdom side. So we can wake up and we can learn and we can transform and we can engage and be able to more and more engage in this intention of wanting to engage in beneficial actions. So that's my understanding of the relationship between karma and what we're doing. Thank you very much.